Hello. You guys ready for some flute? The hat's back. Where's the guitar? Can you do jazz flute like an anchor man, where he just like pulls it out of his sleeve? He's like, "Oh, I'm totally unprepared." What is this music? This is a Native American flute. I picked up one of these this summer, and it's so relaxing. It's best if you play it in like a big echoey space. Through the fire and the flames we carry on. Dude, there's no way I can play that. This instrument is perfect sitting on the edge of a lake or something. I was up in the Adirondacks with my friend's family a couple weeks back, and then just in the middle of the night, we took a boat out onto the middle of the out of the lake, and this thing I played it. It echoed for miles. Do I listen to Polyphia by any chance? I'm not familiar with that. I'm not familiar with that one. What kind of music is that? Oh, we gotta update this. Nine. 3D transformations. Euler Angles. Oh, it's too long. Imagine being on the shore and hearing the distant flute playing. Yeah. Yeah, some people yelled across the lake like, nice! There we go. So Polyphia is instrumental prog rock. Right on. I've listened to some prog rock. Mostly I've listened to some prog metal. Like, oh, what are they called? Oh, I feel bad. I can't remember them. How are you guys doing today? You ready to get started? I was feeling a little anxious today. Am I alone? Anybody ever feel anxious here? You can try as your background music someday if you want. Oh yeah, Polyphia. I'll Google it. Yeah, school's starting up. There's lots of stuff going on. I bet a lot of people get anxious at the start of school. All right, what do you say we get started? I know I uploaded the handout a little late. But hopefully you can get that in front of you. Follow along. All right, let's start by talking about what we covered last time a little bit. So we defined the pose of an aircraft, and the pose has two components. To specify the pose of an aircraft, you need to specify its position, number one, and you also need to specify its attitude. That's not if it's being salty or something. Attitude refers to orientation. We use attitude as a word for orientation with aircraft, spacecraft. So let's consider the example from last time where we have the information to define pose. So I have this aircraft and the body frame fixed to it. BX going right out the nose. The origin of the body frame is at the center of gravity of the aircraft. And we have this fixed frame, F, with origin O. So we can define the pose of the aircraft with two pieces, the position and the orientation. So the position vector, we went through and calculated it. The position of the center of gravity of the aircraft relative to the origin O. So you can express that position vector in the F frame, or you could also express it in the B frame here. So that's the position vector. Now, we also defined a rotation matrix to relate the F frame to the B frame. And the way we did this is we used successive projections, and each element here, if you go back to yesterday's notes, each element is the cosine of the angle between successive basis vectors. So check out last lecture for the details on how we got that. So when a rotation matrix is used to describe orientation, we can also refer to it as an attitude matrix. So with the position vector and this attitude matrix, with those two things combined, we have the pose of the aircraft, the position as well as its orientation. All right? So that's pose. Let's talk a little bit more about rotation matrices, because this will bring us up to Euler angles. So, as we introduced before, a rotation matrix is a 3x3 matrix that has to have two properties. Since last lecture, I updated these properties to be a little more specific, so I'm going to put them here again. But a rotation matrix, it preserves the length of any vector it operates on. So it just rotates a vector. So another way of describing a matrix that preserves length is saying that that matrix is orthogonal. So this is what it means to be orthogonal. If you take a rotation matrix and you take the transpose, that transpose will be equal to the inverse of the matrix. So if a matrix satisfies this, then you know it's orthogonal and it preserves the length of the vectors it operates on. So that would mean, like, to test it out, you could take the matrix, multiply by its transpose, and that should evaluate to the identity matrix. Or you could have done it in a different order, like the transpose times the matrix itself. So that is a test for orthogonality. All right, so this is something that I didn't really discuss last time, but this is important. A rotation matrix cannot produce a pure reflection. So here we're talking about, we're using rotation matrices to describe the orientation of an aircraft, right? There is no way you can flip around an aircraft so that it becomes a mirror image of itself. It's a little thought experiment, but for some of you that might be obvious at first, but just play around with it a little bit. Like, if you look at yourself in a mirror reflected, there's no way you can rotate your body to actually achieve the orientation of yourself in the mirror. Because, like, in the mirror, my left hand to me is now going to be like my right hand, and there's no way that I could make my left hand into my right hand. So a rotation matrix cannot reflect. So the mathematical way that you exclude reflections is the determinant of the rotation matrix has to be positive 1. So an orthogonal matrix is always going to have a determinant of plus or minus 1. So this is just for orthogonal matrices. So when it's minus 1, that means a reflection is taking place. If it's positive 1, that just means purely rotation. So even if you did a reflection operation, that preserves length. Like, if I look at myself in the mirror, I'm the same size. So that's still orthogonal, but it's not a rotation. I couldn't rotate my body to achieve that. I don't know. It took me to sit down and think about it a little bit to believe that. All right, so we're going to throw some math lingo at you. Prepare yourself. So matrices that satisfy those two properties above, so length, preservation, and they're not reflections, they belong to a specific mathematical group called SO3. Now you can compactly define SO3 in this way. So SO3, so I'm reading from left to right. By definition, SO3 is the set of, that's what the bracket is, matrices. So I'll just say like R for a matrix. But not all matrices. Matrices that are specifically 3 by 3 matrices of real numbers. So this like scripty R means a real number. And this 3 by 3 dictates the size of the matrix. So SO3 rotation matrices are 3 by 3 matrices composed of real numbers, such that, number one, they're orthogonal. So I'll say, if I take the transpose, multiply it with it, it's going to be identity. And it doesn't reflect. It only rotates. So that means that the determinant is positive 1, not minus 1. So this is the compact mathematical way of describing rotation matrices. It's just those properties I listed above. It's the mathematical group of SO3. Okay. So thinking about this physically, SO3 is the group of all possible aircraft orientations. Because if you have a rotation matrix between a fixed frame and a body frame, that's describing the orientation of an aircraft in space. So this group of all possible rotation matrices, physically, it is the group of all possible aircraft orientations in three-dimensional space. Pretty cool, huh? Now, consider a generic rotation matrix from F to B, from the fixed frame to the body frame, and described by the cosines of the angles between respective basis vectors. So this is the way we derived a rotation matrix last time. So as you can see, this rotation matrix, I have 9 parameters that I'm using to parameterize this matrix. Okay, so this matrix is parameterized in terms of 9 variables, the angles between the basis vectors. But we're going to see that to exist in SO3, so for this to be a rotation matrix, actually most of these parameters are dependent on one another. So these angles, these were the 9 angles between the respective basis vectors, they're actually dependent on one another. We really only need 3 variables to parameterize an orthogonal matrix. So let's break this down. And this is motivating Euler angles. Euler angles are going to be a way to parameterize a rotation matrix with just 3 variables, not 9. Because you don't need 9. So let's break it down. If indeed, to indeed be a rotation matrix, we know that the rotation matrix must first of all be orthogonal. So in order for it to be orthogonal, that means, the matrix transposed with itself, that's going to resolve in the identity matrix. But if you go through the matrix math, what that means is the dot product of any column in that matrix with another column other than itself must be 0. So let's break that down. So let's take this rotation matrix up above, but write it in terms of its columns. So the first column, I'm going to call it a vector F. And the angles that were in the first column, if you check it out, it's alpha 1, 1, alpha 2, 1, alpha 3, 1. So this vector F is going to be this. So it's a function of alpha 1, 1, alpha 2, 1, alpha 3, 1. Let's call this F1. So F1 vector is that. F2 is the second column of this rotation matrix. So that's entries 2, 1, 2, 2, and 2, 3. So all I'm doing is I'm writing this matrix in terms of its columns. So nothing crazy going on. But to be orthogonal, the dot product of any column with a column other than itself has to be 0. So that means if I take the first column and take the dot product with the second column, which would be, from our properties of dot products, we know that would be the same as the second one dotted with the first, that's going to evaluate to 0. Same thing here. If I take the first with the third column and dot them together, that's going to be 0. If I take the second with the third, which is the same as dotting the third into the second, that's going to be 0. So we have 3, you could call each of these equations like a constraint on this matrix. If it is indeed a rotation matrix, then this must be true. So now if you take the dot product of any column with itself, that dot product must be 1. So this adds another 3 constraints. So that's 6 constraints for the parameters of this matrix if it's going to satisfy the criteria of being a rotation matrix. Now, with each of the 6 equations, we can eliminate one of these angle variables by writing it in terms of the other variables. Like whenever you do substitution to solve a system of equations, what you're doing is systematically writing one variable at a time in terms of the other variables. And that effectively eliminates that variable from the equation. So if we eliminate 6 variables with the 6 equations, this orthogonality condition leaves us with only 3 variables. So that's why, to parameterize a rotation matrix, we only need to use, you guessed it, 3 variables. And this is where Euler Angles come in. I'm going to take a little drink of water. You guys following along so far? You feeling good? Okay. So, Euler Angles. These are a set of 3 variables. You remember this from 345. Good. Good, good, good. We're just bringing it back to the forefront of your mind. Euler Angles, they're a set of 3 variables used to parameterize a rotation, also known as an attitude matrix, where the angles correspond to a sequence of elementary, or elementary rotation is also a planar rotation, about a set of intermediate axes to achieve a final orientation. So a nice way to get acquainted with the basic idea of Euler Angles is to play with this visualization tool. And I think you'll remember this from 345, because because I got this from Dr. Darrell. But, so we're just going to review this really quick. Okay, so the idea of Euler angles, so we got this aircraft here. We achieve a rotation, I mean an orientation of this aircraft in space by performing 3 successive rotations about intermediate axes. And there's different orders in which you can do this. So, like, let's start back at the same place. Like, I could have started by pitching about the original axis. But this new orientation creates what we call an intermediate frame. And so I could yaw about that intermediate frame that's kind of pitched up. So I went about pitching, then yawing, and then you can finally roll. So depending on the order in which you do these operations, though, like over here you can see, I'll zoom in a little. They tell you the yaw, pitch, and roll angles. But if you do these in different orders, they should give you... Wait, I think they use 3, 2, 1, actually. Let's test this out. Is that going to be the same as... Did that end up in the same orientation there? Yeah, this might be fixed to just like one type of order. But generally, depending on the order in which you do these rotations, you'll end up in a very different place. Okay, something to notice. You can, okay, we're gonna display these gimbals because this is one way of thinking about it. So we're looking at the tail end of the aircraft. There are certain orientations where there isn't a unique set of angles that'll get you there. So for example, if we pitch up to 90 degrees, you'll see that 2 rings of this gimbal are aligned. So the yaw, or this is the roll that I'm playing with, that's aligned with the yaw axis as well. So I could, let's get like this side view, or wait, we'll get a different view. Let's set this to 0. Okay, so I got this side view, which I achieved by having the yaw angle at 90, the pitch angle at 90, and the roll at 90. But if I make the yaw 45 instead, and I make the roll 45, it's going to get back into the same exact orientation that I had before. So, we'll see later on. This is a problem because there are some orientations using Euler angles where there's an infinite number of angle combinations that bring you to the same place. So like as long as this yaw and roll adds up to 90, then the aircraft is going to look the same. So there's not a unique collection of the 3 angles in this place. And this happens for the case where the pitch angle is plus or minus 90. So this isn't always a problem. Okay, but this gives you the idea. There's 3 axes, we make 3 rotations, and so we have 3 angles that describe the orientation of an aircraft in space. And it all stems from the idea that that's the minimum number of parameters I need. Okay. So, right, like I mentioned, there are some orientations you can arrive at an infinite number of ways. So, using a sequence of yaw, pitch, followed by roll, if you were to pitch plus or minus 90 degrees, that creates what we call a geometric singularity, where, like we saw, there's an infinite number of yaw and roll combinations that can recreate this specific configuration. Okay. So let's get into the details here of parameterizing a rotation matrix in terms of the 3-2-1 Euler angles. So we're going to parameterize the rotation matrix from a fixed frame F prime, which I'll define in a second, to the body frame B in terms of the 3-2-1 Euler angles. We'll define those as well. So what is this F prime frame? This F prime frame is going to be the same as the F frame, which is just the fixed frame. And the only thing that I'm going to change is the origin. So instead of the origin being at O, I'm going to place the origin of F prime at the CG of the aircraft. But I'm going to use the same basis vectors from the fixed frame. So just imagine shifting the fixed frame to the CG of the aircraft. Okay. Now, let's say I want to do 3 rotations to arrive at the body frame, like a puzzle. Now, if you're going to do this in the 3-2-1 configuration, what that means is you start with this F prime frame, and first you rotate about the third basis vector axis. That's where the 3 comes from. And you're going to rotate an angle C. The third basis vector is defined as the yaw axis. So this variable C is going to represent yaw in our flight dynamics class. Okay, so the third basis vector is FZ. So we're going to rotate some angle C about FZ. And when we complete this rotation, and you'll see what I mean here, this rotation will produce our first intermediate frame, I1. We're going to define the third basis vector of I1 to be the same as the third basis vector of F. So here I'm defining I1 mathematically. I'm going to put its origin at G, also the center of gravity of the aircraft. And like I said, I'm going to make this third basis vector of I1 be equal to the third basis vector of my F frame, which is FZ. So what I'm doing is we're going to draw this on here. This light blue color is going to be the basis vectors of I1. So I3 prime, the third basis vector of I, is aligned with FZ. So I'm going to rotate about this basis vector an angle C. So let's rotate this an angle C. And this is going to form I1. This is using the right-hand rule here. Like I3 crossed into I1 should produce I2. And so this light blue frame rotated an angle C about this third axis. This is our first intermediate frame, I1. So it's just like that program we were playing with the plane, where we do one rotation and that brings our orientation to a new fixed location about which we're going to do future rotations. Oh, a quick note here. So on the next homework, we tell you to use, you do a problem like this, if you haven't looked at the homework yet, but we ask you to derive a rotation matrix in terms of some other Euler angles other than 3, 2, 1. But we tell you to make drawings of these successive rotations, and we tell you to use the elementary rotation perspective. And all that means is that the axis of rotation is pointed out of the page. So I mean, I kind of draw this isometric perspective, but the point is, it just makes it a little easier to draw. All right, so this is our first rotation, and we're going to make a rotation matrix to describe the relationship between the F frame and the I1 frame. So the way to make that rotation matrix, the way we've done it before, is you relate the basis vectors to one another. So I3 to FZ, that's easy. They're equivalent. I1 is going to be the cosine of the angle between I1 and FX along FX. So that's just using that projection technique. And I'm kind of just going to skip ahead on these. And then it's going to be the sine times the... I gotta stay consistent with my colors though. So that's going to be, that sine of that cosine there is the cosine of the angle between those two basis vectors. I'm just pulling back up my cheat sheet. Make sure I don't mess this up. Oh, why did I call it 1, 1? It's just psi. Or C. I'm not totally sure how you pronounce it. Okay. So that's how I1 is related to the F-frame basis vectors. And then let's look at I2. So that's going to be cosine of C times Fy and then it's going to be minus sine of C times Fx. And we're going to arrange these three equations into a rotation matrix. Just zoom out a little, try to keep them both in the frame. There we go. So starting with I3, that's easy. 0, 0, 1. It's just 1 times FZ. And then if I go up to I1, that's going to be cosine C times Fx. I could draw that a little neater. Plus sine of C times Fy, and then 0 times Fz. So that's the I1 prime equation. And then I2, it's going to be minus sine times Fx plus cosine C times Fy, and then 0. And that is the rotation matrix. Once again, that's our notation. rotation matrix from F to I1. Okay, and this is the first of 3 rotations. We rotated about the 3 axis, the third basis vector. Okay, let's move on. Next, you're going to rotate about the second basis vector. Just to remind you, we're doing the 3, 2, 1 Euler angles. I think in your homework you do 3, 1, 2. So in your homework, next you would rotate about the first, or I don't remember if it's exactly 3, 1, 2. But that's just what the 3, 2, 1 means. So next we're going to rotate about the second basis vector axis of the intermediate frame. So we rotated to an intermediate frame, and now we're rotating about that new frame. And we're going to rotate an angle theta. The second basis vector is defined as the pitch axis. At least for 3, 2, 1 Euler angles. So when we do this rotation, it's going to produce our second intermediate frame, I2. So we're going from I1 to I2. Now, just like we did for the 3 rotation, for the 2 rotation, we're going to define the second basis vector of I2, which is going to be our next intermediate frame, to be the same as the second basis vector of I1. Okay, so we're going to draw this. We're going to go over this. So I'm going to use this nice forest green color for I2. Do any of you guys love Bob Ross? I find it to be the most soothing thing to watch. Oh man, it is so good. I know some people don't like it, like when he's painting, you can hear every little scratch on the canvas. When he cleans the brush, just like and so for me, those sounds are all really soothing, like ASMR, whatever. My wife Hannah, she hates it. She hates those sounds. Does anybody here just hate the Bob Ross sounds? We won't ostracize you. But I love it. He's so chill. He really is. It's so relaxing. So we're going to be like Bob Ross on this drawing right here. Okay, we're really going to try to harness. They took Bob Ross off Netflix? And you're not, yeah, I wouldn't be over that either. But Bob Ross is on Twitch. You can get your fill on Twitch. Okay, so come over here, pick a nice phthalo green, forest green, mix it with some phthalo blue and midnight black. We're going to define the second basis vector of this new intermediate frame to be the same as the second basis vector of our previous frame. Now, this is why I forget what perspective I called it up above. I think elementary frame perspective, but the point is, even though I rotated I1, that intermediate frame, before, I'm just redrawing it in this standard fixed way. I'm imagining that the camera moved around just so that now I2 is pointing out of the page. Yeah, we're just gonna draw a happy little Euler angle here. An Euler angle always needs a friend. Okay, so we're gonna rotate about this 2 axis an angle theta. There we go. Okay, so this is going to be my I3 double prime. And this is going to be my I1 double prime. Happy little basis vectors. Oh wait, did I have a little typo in my notes. We're rotating about the 2 axis. So that's the pitch axis. Okay, so once again, we're going to make a rotation matrix, and we have to relate these basis vectors. So let's look at I3. It's going to be cosine of this pitch angle times I3 prime plus sine of this angle I1 prime. The nice thing about this this perspective to keep drawing your rotations in, these equations are going to be pretty repetitive because I keep drawing it the same way, so it's not too much trouble to figure this out again. So cosine theta times I1. So it's going to keep following this pattern is what I'm trying to say. Okay. So we related the basis vectors. Now we're going to put that, we're going to fill in our rotation matrix just like we did before. Now be careful because it's going to look different. This time the 2 vector was the same. So I2 double prime is equal to I2 prime. And then I1 is going to be cosine theta 0 minus sine theta. And I3 is going to be sine theta 0 cosine theta. So I'm just taking those 3 equations up above and writing them in this vectrix notation. And when you do that, now we have the rotation matrix from I1 to I2, our second intermediate frame. Now we have 1 rotation left, and this third rotation is going to line us up with the body frame. And that's all the work we need to do. So let's do it one more time. You're getting the hang of it by this point. So remember, we're doing 3, 2, 1 Euler angles. So finally, we're going to rotate about the first basis vector of the most recent intermediate frame, which was I2. And the final angle is phi. So the first basis vector is referred to as the roll axis. Okay, so this rotation, like I said, this is going to produce our final frame, the body frame, B. So just like we did with the others, I'm going to define the first basis vector of B to be the same as the first basis vector of I2. So whatever you're rotating about, define your new 1 vector in the same way. So for the body frame, we've been defining the first basis vector as Bx, the second as By, and the third as Bz. So I'm rotating about the first axis. So now I've drawn the first axis coming out of the page. So this is going to be Bx. And then we're going to rotate an angle phi. And this one is going to be my By vector. And this is going to be Bz. All right, remember the one vector, so bx, I define that to be the same as the one vector of my second intermediate frame. And then we're going to fill this out for the last time. I know you must be pretty upset about this. There's not 5 more opportunities. Okay, cosine phi plus sine phi okay, bz is cosine phi I3 minus sine phi. Every time I hear opportunities, I think of battles in 315 and 316. I remember when I, as that came out of my mouth, I remembered, yeah, that's what they're called in that class. Is there supposed to be a prime on the bx in the, oh, you're right. This bx down here, I don't know why I put a prime on there. I don't want that there. Is an opportunity also called a tiny take-home? Okay. All right, we're going to make our last rotation matrix with these basis vector relations. So we'll bring these back into the same frame once again so we can see. Okay. So the one basis vector is the same, 1, 0, 0. And then by 0 cosine phi sine phi 0 minus sine phi cosine phi. For tiny take-homes, tiny's actually equal to large. Okay, so that gives us the final rotation matrix from the intermediate frame I2, finally, to the body frame B. So 3 rotations is the minimum number required to bring us. Okay, so what we want to do, we're interested in the relationship ultimately between the fixed frame and the body frame. So remember, this is from F to B. So we started all the way at the beginning from F to I1, from I1 to I2, from I2 to B. So we multiply these matrices together like this to go from F to B. So kind of this string of superscripts, that notation is supposed to help you remember the order of things. Just in case you forget, which order am I supposed to be multiplying these matrices? Now we won't go through this together because this would just take forever, but if you look at the matrices we derived up above, I'm just plugging them in. And if you multiply everything out, oh, by the way, you've probably seen this notation, like this by definition is cosine and S is by definition sine. So this just saves us some time writing it all out. Okay, so if you do this, this is important. This is the rotation matrix from F to B, and this is parameterized in the 3, 2, 1 Euler angles. Want to become famous by... Okay. How do I ban? Boom. Okay. So, using this matrix, I want to do an example of... Oops. Like, take our rotation matrix from the example we did earlier. So these C11, C12, these are just, imagine that those are just numbers. So I have a rotation matrix in terms of numerical values. If I have those numerical values, how can I backtrack what the three Euler parameters are? So the nice thing about the Euler parameters, if I have, you know, a 3x3 matrix, I can condense that information to just three numbers, the Euler angles. So if I have this 3x3 matrix, how do we go back to the Euler angles? So what I want to show you is, if you take C12 divided by C11, so the 1,2 entry divided by the 1,1 entry, so this is the 1,2, cosine theta sine C, and if I divide by the 1,1, which is cosine theta cosine C, well, the cosines cancel out, and I end up with sine over cosine, which is tangent of C. So C, if I have these numbers, C would just be the inverse tangent of the number in the 1,2 position by the number in the 1,1. So this is how you like back out what my C is. Oh, this is an easy one. Look at element C13. C13 is minus sine of theta. The 1,3 entry. Minus sine theta. Okay, well that just means that theta is going to be minus inverse sine of whatever number's in the 1,3 position. So it's not too difficult to backtrack out these Euler parameters from a matrix. Okay, let's do C23 divided by C33. So this divided by that. So we're going to have sine phi cosine theta divided by cosine phi cosine theta. So these cosine thetas cancel, and we're left with another tangent, it looks like. Okay, so that means we can get phi by taking the inverse tangent of the number in the 2,3 position divided by the number in the 3,3 position. Okay, but below here, I'm going to give you a more reliable set of formulas. So, but before we get to those, let's go back to our example. And let's try to use the formulas we just got to recover the Euler parameters. So, from the example we did last class, we derived this rotation matrix, and the way we got this rotation matrix is we used the directional cosines. which we know is kind of an over parameterization. You don't need 9 parameters to make a matrix like this. But let's try to back out what the Euler parameters would be. So we don't have to scroll up. I want to show you. So we said C should be the inverse tangent of the C12 element divided by the C11. So that's going to be the inverse tangent of 0 over 0.9063. So that's tangent of 0, which is just 0 degrees. Okay. Maybe I should let me bring the picture down here so we can have that as reference. If you don't remember what it looked like. I feel like I wrote so much here and then we just blasted through it so very quickly. Okay, so this is our let's put it like right here. So, like if we were going to do the 3-2-1 transformation into this body frame position, remember we start at the fixed frame and we would align our first set of axes with the 3 axis if we're doing the 3-2-1 Euler angles. So the 3 axis is FZ. So I would be aligning my first intermediate frame with FZ and then rotating oh yeah, about that. I confused myself for a second. So the yaw would be about that, but when it's in this orientation over here. Like it wouldn't have been pitched at that point. And we can see that this aircraft, it hasn't been rotated at all. It's just fixed within the frame of the paper. So just looking at the figure, it makes sense that it hasn't yawed relative to the fixed frame in terms of 3-2-1 Euler angles. Okay, let's proceed. Okay, the pitch, we see its nose up a little bit, so we should get something that makes sense. Okay, so the equation for theta is minus inverse sine of the C13 position. So minus inverse sine of minus 0.4226. And if you calculate that, it's 0.436 radians, which is indeed 25 degrees. So we had our first intermediate frame, which we rotated in angle C, which was 0 degrees. So really, our first intermediate frame is just equal to the fixed frame. Then we pitch about our first intermediate frame 25 degrees. So that makes sense. That's what we see here. Relative to the fixed frame, which would be the same as our first intermediate frame, we pitched up 25 degrees. But check this out. The formula that we derived for this angle is the inverse tangent of C23 over C33, which is oh, never mind. I think this works. I thought this wasn't going to work. 0 over 0.9063. No, wait. I did 3-2. No, that's the same. Okay, never mind. I'm crazy. So that's going to be 0 again. For whatever reason, when I was making these notes, I think I reversed this, and I thought I was going to get 90 degrees, which makes no sense, right? But I believe so this doesn't turn out to be a case where these formulas aren't reliable, but these alternative formulas up above, well, this first formula is the same, that equation for theta, but you'll notice that these equations for C and phi, these replace those inverse tangent functions. And I'm guessing these are just a little more numerically reliable. So if you're getting answers that surprise you using those other formulas, you can come back to this. So these rely on the parameter delta, which is just defined here. But it's just defined in terms of numbers of the within the rotation matrix. Let's see. Ooh. Okay, so that's an example of once you have a rotation matrix, how do you recover the Euler parameters? Now, we're using 3, 2, 1, but there are other possibilities, my friends. And it's important. What does it mean sign in those formulas? Okay, great question. Okay, so this sign, this is different from, it's not like a sign. What this sign means, it means plus or minus. So like the sign of C12 is asking if it's a positive or negative. So let's look in our case. C12. Well, it's, oh, that, what would you do in that case? It's 0. What about C23? Okay, that's 0. But if it was this number, you would just put a minus because it's asking what's the sign? Well, it's minus. So this is going to evaluate to plus or minus. Okay. So here are, you're very welcome. If you go through all of the, is 0 I don't really know. I don't think 0 doesn't have a sign, right? I mean, when we do limits, we do like approaching from the left or right hand side. That's strange to me. I'll get back to you on that. Don't let me off the hook. Jared says, I remember in 345, we would always multiply our direction cosine matrices in reverse. So for Euler 321, it was DCM1, DCM2, DCM3. Could it have been that we were just rotating about different frames? Let's go back here. Well, okay, this one, remember, this matrix was rotating about the sine 0 equals 0. I think you're right. So this was about the 3. This was about the 2. And this was about the 1. So I think this is the same, Jared. This is DCM1 multiplied by DCM2 multiplied by DCM3. Does that make sense? Sine 0. Because, okay, what if we... That makes sense. Because we know in reality these should be 0. So if sine 0 multiplies to, evaluates to 0, then it gives us back what we know it should be. Thank you for that. Okay. Okay, so if you go through the permutations, combinations, whatever it is, I think I was just confused because we started by rotating about I3. Right. So why am I showing you 3, 2, 1? This is popular for aircraft. Jeez. UAVs. So on. Now these other ones are used. But there's some more popular ones. So 231. This was used on the Apollo lunar module. Okay. Oh, what am I doing? Okay, and then 313 is popularly used by astronomers when they're talking about the relative orbits of planets. I'm trying to... trying to look at the reason for that. Yeah, for the 313 Euler Angles, you have, yeah, it's not pitch, yaw, and roll. It's called, like I think so the 3 is the longitude of the ascending node, the 1 is the inclination, and then the final 3 is the argument of the perihelion. I have no idea what that means. But these Euler angles have different properties that are advantageous to different disciplines. But we're going to stick to 321. Like I said, though, the problem with these is there are some geometric singularities. Meaning, if our aircraft was pitched up 90 degrees or down 90 degrees, I wouldn't be able to recover the Euler angles from that, because there's an infinite combination of Euler angles which can create that orientation. Do repeated numbers mean you're rotating about the same axis? Well, like let's take 1, 2, 1. This would mean that, okay, we start here, and so we start by rotating about our 1 axis here. I'm going to try to draw this like all on one thing. Okay, so then we have a new 1 axis, a new 2 axis, and a new 3 axis, and then we're going to rotate about the 2. And we're going to define a new 2 variable. Oh, this is going to turn into a nightmare, isn't it? So I'm rotating about the 2. And this will be my 3, I guess. And this will be my 1 double prime. And then we're going to rotate about the 1. Okay, so then I make a new, I guess my final frame, my body frame is going to be aligned here. and I'm going to rotate about this for my final rotation. So you don't rotate about the same axis again because you're always creating a new intermediate frame. Does that make sense? Yeah, you're welcome. Uncle says, yellow, y'all. Okay, guys. So that is going to wrap up our discussion of Euler angles today. So this has all been stuff for calculating or representing the pose of an aircraft. So that's the position and orientation. Next week, we're going to start getting into if it's actually moving with some velocity, how do we relate your rotational rates about the body frame to the time derivatives of the Euler angles. Friday, we're going to have a little recitation, and I think I'm going to go through some example stuff. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do yet, but it's going to be more examples. Or if I have anything insightful to add to this. Dr. Estes, I wanted to know if you got my email regarding the homework. My PDF app was not allowing me to connect, so I had to email JPEGs of my written work. MATLAB is published to UB Learns. Oh, got you. Okay, yeah, I saw that. You emailed me some JPEGs. Yeah, that's no problem. But if you can, try Cam Scanner again and just re-upload the PDFs to UB Learns, and I'll make a note that to regard that assignment as on time. Well done. I really sound like that. My redneck nerd is inescapable. I was just trying to read it as you wrote it. Oh, so you already emailed me those PDFs? Yeah, put those on UB Learns too. I'd appreciate that. Okay. Like I said, that's it for today, my friends. I hope you're having a good day. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, you're welcome. Our TA has office hours tonight on Discord starting at 4:30. I would say get going on the next homework as soon as you can, And hey, thanks. I appreciate it. Glad you enjoyed it. And then I'll have office hours Thursday. So just get chipping away and hey, thanks, Miracle. See you around on Friday. So I'll hang around maybe just 2 or 3 more minutes, and then I got to run to some road vehicle dynamics office hours. That's my plan. I guess someday I'll have to make the the trademark part of the joke legit. Alright everybody, I'm going to sign out. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Peace.